Hello, you wonderful people, and welcome to another episode of SuperFantaFi. This being a show where we talk about TV shows of the supernatural, fantasy, and/or science fictional genre. For today's episode, I'm going to talk about Welcome to Japan, Miss Elf, Season 1, Episode 3. A lot of really interesting things went down in this episode, so let's break it down. So we have Marie continuing to learn Japanese. Obviously, she's kind of getting like one phrase down, and she's trying to take that and kind of expand upon that. There's a whole conversation, the whole adage of right, it takes it's 2,000 hours to kind of learn a language you don't know, which I feel like I vaguely heard that before, but maybe the number's been different. But Marie wants to kind of get it down to 2 months, because he's basically, if you do 10 hours a day of practicing it for 10 hours a day, it'll be about 200 days, and she wants to get it down to 2 months. And I think that's interesting because later on, Kazuhiro is kind of if he's able to sleep so comfortably now that he has someone beside him to sleep, but he also worries but after 2 months, I guess he's worried once she kind of knows the language, she won't have as much of a reason to stay in Japan as often, and she'd go back to her world, because there is a conversation later on about she's got so much other responsibilities to the Sorcerer's Guild and stuff like that, and there's so much she has to work on that it's kind of I can't monopolize is the word I was looking for, her time here. And he's kind of worried what if once she kind of worried that if once she learns the language, she's just going to move on, and like I said, probably just not have as much time that he can spend with her like this, because he's gotten to know her in a way he's never gotten to know her before. So it does bring up the interesting conversation after they had some food. She's got some alcohol in her system, so she's not the biggest drinker and gets a little drunk because there's the wine he had paired with the gyoza. And they has a conversation about what about the dragon scale and stone that you got last episode? It's well, I don't have them with me. It's once again, it's that thing of very few things he brings from Japan to that world transfers over, and very few, and it seems like it doesn't transfer at all. It seems like Marie's the only thing, anything that he's ever brought from that world over back to Japan. And he kind of surmises right, while my body's not there, either everything disappears with me or my body becomes invisible, because he's I've popped back into Japan time and time again, and when I've popped back into that other world, I've still had my stuff, so no one's ever stolen it, so I guess we don't have to worry about it. And when they do come back, they still do have the scale and the stone, so it does kind of add to that. And Marie's it just further proves that someone is managing this, so that it's not like his body's there in some catatonic state that's waiting for someone to do something to his body. It's never come up until now, so it kind of feels more like a situation of like I said, either his body disappears or it just becomes invisible to any people of that world. So I mean, we still, there's a lot to be experimented with on that front, because it's well, what happens if Kazuhiro comes back to Japan alone and Marie's not with him? What does she see from that side of things? So far it's been them as a package deal that's come through, so we've never had someone on the receiving end, on the other end, be oh, this is what happened to your body, does it just disappear in my eyes? And even if it does, maybe it's a little different because Marie's traveled with him, so her eyes are kind of shifted to see it, whereas maybe other people who've never been to Japan, who are just native to that world, would never be able to see them or anything associated with them. I don't know. It's something that it's you could get in really nitty gritty about getting into the minute details about it, but I don't know if the series will. It seems like they kind of are asking certain questions, interesting enough. But either way, to help out Marie, Kazuhiro suggests they go to a very specific ruin, and back into their back to her world, and he uses one of his abilities, because this episode brought up some really interesting things. I guess he's technically, if you had to classify him, maybe they brought this up in episode 1 and I didn't remember. I didn't know what class he was of character, and it seems like he's a merchant character because he's using an ability known as travel. It allows him to, it's almost the equivalency of fast travel in a game, except it's weirdly enough, it's the weirdest example I can make, and it's not a one-to-one, but it kind of reminds me of Xenoblade Chronicles. Technically, when you're fast traveling, technically you're walking that entire way. That's it. But you're just cutting out the whole walking process. Because most, fast travel, it's like, no, you're just teleporting there. I mean, there's plenty of games that's like, no, theoretically, you're just walking there. It's not like you're just like fast traveling. Some stuff makes it like, no, you're like a Dragon Quest. When you're fast traveling, they clearly show you flying off into the air. So that's how that works and stuff more magically. But it's just something interesting to think about. But yeah, it's like a highway process. Like, okay, you go beneath like this layer of the world and you're traveling, and you basically have to pay like a not a homage, but you have to pay kind of tribute to like a traveling god. All merchants can do it. Well, not all merchants, but it's like it's a skill unique to merchants. But it's not, like I said, it's not an instantaneous thing. He's like, okay, this particular traveling it'll take us about 20 minutes to get there, which cuts down on time because it's like Maria's like, oh, like it would take them about a week to travel there by like whether it be by like on probably even longer on foot, but even carriage wise, it would take us like a week. So you massively cutting travel time. But even that, it's just still 20 minutes. It's kind of interesting instead of instantaneous. But it's also like, he's like, oh yeah, make sure you don't stray too far from me, because he's like, I'm only done this with me up until now, so I don't know what would happen if you got too far away from me while I'm using his skill. So she snuggles close to him. Also, there's a weight limit, but it's like, oh, you don't have to worry about it because you're super light. Which she's like, okay, but you could, Kazuhiro, you could, well, to her it's Kazuhiro, you can put me down now. He's like, oh, okay, sure. So, but they end up making their way to the ruins. And obviously, this is where we learn that Marie does not handle heat well. I wonder, is that an elf thing in general, or maybe that's just a her thing, which even gets Kazuhiro thinking, like, ooh, how's she going to fare in Japan summers? That's going to be interesting. But he's like trying to regale her about like the ruins, how like magic stones used to be like, mined from this place, but eventually like stuff, because like obviously magic stones kind of go into like the manufacturing of so many things. But he was like, eventually like 200 years ago, for whatever reason, there were some things that happened that made it so like they were no longer able to mine magic stones here, but people who've come here can still feel the presence of them. So they're still here somewhere, buried underneath. No one's just been able to get to them, and the place has fallen in disarray and decay like over the past 200 years. But while he's kind of regaling her with all this information, she's dying from the heat, and she's almost like, I almost kind of want to hate you for bringing us all the way out here. So but yeah, they make their way inside, kind of see the ruins, and you see there was like a culture here, not outside of just like it being like this mining type of place. It seems like it's one of those towns that's based around a mine, but it has its own culture and stuff to it. So I thought that was interesting. And what I also thought was fascinating, once again, kind of world building. I wasn't expecting like Kazuhiro to have like he was like, oh, like let me check my status screen so you can see some stuff, and he's like, oh, let me see yours. She's like, really? Okay. I was surprised because at first because I treat this as like that isekai thing where like, that doesn't have to just allocate it to isekai, but those storylines, because I read quite a few webtoons that have kind of or video games of animes and just webtoons in general that have adopted the framing device of, oh, life has become like a video game. You have a status screen, quests and stuff like that, right? So the fact is, I was expecting him to have that, and maybe he could see other people's status windows and stuff, or their statuses, their levels and stuff. But then later on, she pulls up one. So I'm like, oh, I guess just like everyone has that in this world. I was like, oh, that's interesting. I would have thought that was something just unique to him, that he could view that, but no one else can. It's like, no, they just casually pull it up. Because she's like, oh, I don't want to kind of share it. Would I show you? Just be careful you don't share it with anyone. She's like, why? She's like, with the Sorcerer Guild, everything's all about competition and trying to one-up each other. So she's on the lower end of levels because he's apparently level like 70 something, and she's like, I've never really known anyone that high level. I mean, to be fair, he's been doing this thing for a while, but also like the sorcerer that because she's a spirit sorcerer, she's like, it's not the easiest thing to level up, the like to focus on all that stuff, but he's like pretty decently leveled up. But we find out she's not a regular sorcerer. As she kind of breaks it down, magic doesn't directly come from her wand. It's more like she summons a spirit and kind of her magic, and she kind of fuels them with magic. So it is kind of like a nice prepping thing that like, okay, as long as you summon your beast, it's a little Pokemon, Digimon-esque, but it's also just, summoners in general, where it's like, hey, you're summoning a spirit to do your fighting for you. So I thought that was interesting. But it's like, yeah, you can stockpile your magic inside of your summoned creature ahead of time. But then these creatures show up, and then Kazuhiro deals with them himself. He uses an ability called was it Overdrive or Overload? What was the? I think it might have been Overload. But basically, it's like a more combat, I guess, orientated version of the travel skill. It's like a short distance. It almost seems like kind of like instantaneous transmission. God, if I stumbled to say that because I've not had to say that phrase in so long. I mean, because I'm messing it up because it's like that's the process, but it's like instant transmission is just the name of it, but instantaneous transmission. But you get what I'm trying to say from Dragon Ball. Like, I'm sure other things have used it, but like instant transmission was my first introduction to that, like the fast travel kind of like concept of like, oh, as long as you focus it in your mind. I just haven't had to use that phrase in so long because I haven't seen like anything Dragon Ball related in so long. Either way, it was just kind of interesting seeing him kind of utilize that in combat, and he's fighting these things. So, but nearby we see some bandits are watching, and the leader of it is able to see the stuff that Kazuhiro has on him, the stone and the scale. He doesn't know what they are, but he can tell they're valuable. So it's like, all right, this kid's actually pretty strong, so that has to be a little concerning. But it's like, oh, they have someone there they have captured. It's a beastkin who has a which is interesting because if you look at the outro, there's like a black cat that has like some red like elements to like his tail and ears, and I'm like, is that supposed to be the same person? Just like I was like, I was wondering if it was going to be that type of situation, like spoilers, like a Morgana from Persona 5 when like in the metaverse, Morgana looks like Morgana, like that walking anthropomorphic thing, but then like in just the regular world, Morgana looks like a cat. I was wondering if it's something like that. Maybe I'm reading too much into it. It probably popped up before, but I'd never noticed it until now, and I put two and two together, it being a beastkin, and you might try. Once again, I don't know if they bring the dragon over, because like some of the ending stuff and stuff shows like the dragon in what appears to be more Japan orientated attire, like from like festivals and stuff, but maybe that's something they brought. I was like, no, I was about to say they can't bring stuff over other than food and drinks, so it can't be here in this world. But whatever the case may be, we'll probably expand upon that and kind of explore that more as the season goes on. But putting all that aside, this person is kind of like their slave. I don't know what the situation is, but they're forced to fight, and they summon a giant creature that attacks both of Kazuhiro and Marie. Luckily, they get attacked, but they wake up in Japan, so everything's okay. But it's like, okay, and Kazuhiro and Marie are talking it out, and they kind of discuss like, right, they were bandits, but he doesn't believe that person attacked them willingly. That beastkin might have been forced in that situation. So kind of very similar to the dragon thing of like, well, we do go back there, we're going to have an issue, because it's like, well, they're most likely searching, trying to find the remains of our bodies, to steal stuff off our bodies, but obviously they're not going to find anything. So that's going to be interesting, especially when you do eventually pop back up. It's just like the dragon thing, you do have to formulate a plan of how you deal with that. But for now, it's like, well, Kazuhiro doesn't have to get ready for work because it's Saturday. So it's like we could spend the entire day together, do whatever you want. I could help you with your language. We can just like hang out. So I wonder if that's just going to be the entirety of next episode. It's kind of like this is his first like full day off. I mean, because they spend time together in episode 2, but I'm wondering if it's like going to be even more so because it's like a full day of it, and what to get up to is going to be interesting to see. But yeah, really, that's all I wanted to talk about. So the next time we meet, be happy, be safe, live life to the fullest, and enjoy it. Good day and goodbye.